Charlie always pulled the leash the same way. This short, steady tug right after the corner of Frankfurt and Susquehanna, where the smell of fried food from the Korean place mixed in with something coming off the river a few blocks over. Melissa Hart knew that walk by heart. 4 blocks, 10 minutes, the same crooked lamppost he had to sniff. The same neighbor smoking on her second-floor balcony who'd wave without ever taking the cigarette out of her mouth. She'd been doing this same loop for 3 years, ever since she adopted him out of the clinic where she worked part-time back then. And in all that time, she had never once seen Charlie balk at his own front door. 34 years old, 11 of them spent handling scared animals for a living. That teaches you something most people never bother learning. Real fear has its own grammar. It doesn't look like stubbornness. It doesn't look like being tired or cold. She could read ears, tails, breathing, the whole vocabulary of it. She knew the difference between a dog who just didn't feel like walking and a dog trying to tell you something. That's why, the second Charlie planted his feet that night, her first thought wasn't he's being difficult. A few feet from the building's front door, he just stopped. Not the normal kind of stop where he's sniffing a pole or eyeing a squirrel. His front paws locked up on the concrete, his whole weight thrown backward, and the leash yanked hard enough to bite into her hand. Melissa gave it a light tug, the way she always did when he was just messing around. "Charlie, come on, buddy." He fought it harder than plain stubbornness could explain. A 60-pound dog doesn't dig in like that for no reason. She knew that from work, from years of holding down panicked animals on the exam table, knowing the exact second fear turns into raw muscle. Charlie was shaking, ears pinned back flat, pulling backward with his nose pointed at the street, not the door. Okay, I got you." She crouched down, tried to settle him with a hand on his chest, felt his heart hammering way too fast for a normal walk. Nothing on the street looked off. The street light on the corner buzzed the way it always did. A car rolled by slow, headlights sliding across the sidewalk, then gone around the next block. Nobody was hanging around out there. No other dogs. Nothing that would explain any of this. It took almost 5 minutes to talk him into the last few feet, and even then he went in sideways, half-dragged, glancing back over his shoulder every couple steps. The lobby had that same stale paint and cleaning product smell Melissa had stopped noticing years ago. They took the stairs. The elevator had been down for weeks, another maintenance ticket that went nowhere. And Charlie kept it up the whole way, freezing on every landing, twisting his whole body back toward the front door 2 flights down, like he could see straight through the concrete. On the second floor, they passed Mr. Doyle, who'd lived in the building longer than anyone else Melissa knew, sitting in his open doorway with a mug in his hand, same as most nights. "He's acting weird tonight," Doyle said, watching Charlie duck his head and pick up the pace. "Probably caught a whiff of something outside, a raccoon or whatever." Probably, he said, not sounding like he believed it, and went back to staring into his mug. She didn't think much of his tone at the time. It was only later, going over everything again in her head, that she realized Doyle had something to say too, and just didn't. Inside the apartment, she unclipped the leash and waited for him to do his usual thing. The full body shake, then straight over to the water bowl. Nothing. Charlie stayed frozen about 3 feet from the door, low to the ground, eyes locked on the gap between the wood and the frame like whatever was on the other side deserved every ounce of his attention. Melissa dropped her coat on a chair, flipped on the kitchen light, tried to fill the place with the usual night noise. The fridge kicking on, the bathroom fan humming, the upstairs neighbor dragging something across the floor. Charlie didn't budge. Every few seconds he let out this low sound, barely there, the kind she'd only heard out of him twice before. Once during a thunderstorm that hit way too close, once when a bigger dog went after him at the park. "Hey, what's going on with you?" He didn't even look at her. That was strange, too. Charlie always answered to his name, always broke eye contact for at least a second, no matter what he was staring at. Now his whole attention was pinned on that door. And slowly, without ever looking away, he started backing up. One step, then another, his nails ticking quiet little sounds against the wood floor until his back hit the bedroom door frame. Something crawled up the back of Melissa's neck that she couldn't really explain later. She hadn't heard a thing out in the hallway, hadn't seen anything through the peephole either, which she checked twice. Eye pressed to the curved glass until the whole image blurred into smears of yellow light. That's when she caught it. That thin strip of hallway light that always leaked in under the door, steady, and even like a little ruler of brightness, had a break in it. A block of dark sitting right in the middle, about the size of a foot, maybe two. Not shifting, not sliding past the way a shadow does when somebody's just walking through the hall. Just sitting there, not moving. She stood staring at that piece of dark long enough to start second-guessing herself, telling herself it was tiredness, some trick of the light, something dumb and explainable. But Charlie was still pressed into the bedroom doorframe, that low growl going steady now, eyes still glued to the door. The shadow didn't move. Melissa didn't go near it. She stayed right where she was, in the kitchen, one hand still on the light switch, counting seconds without realizing she was counting them, waiting for that strip of light to fill back in. It didn't. Not that minute anyway. Charlie let out one last growl, deeper than the rest, and slowly lowered himself onto the bedroom floor, eyes never leaving the gap under the door. Melissa stood there, her heart pounding way too loud for how quiet the apartment had gotten, trying to decide if this was the kind of thing you call someone about, the kind of thing you check on yourself, or the kind of thing you just wait out. She waited it out. That was the first of a handful of times over the next few weeks that choice would come back to her. Later, as a mistake too small to notice while she was making it. By morning, the strip of light under the door was whole again, and Charlie was curled up on his bed like any other day, one ear twitching when the radiator clanked on. Melissa almost let herself believe she'd imagined the whole thing, until she went to clip his leash for the morning walk and he wouldn't go anywhere near the door. Not backing away this time, just sitting, staring at her like she'd asked him to walk into traffic. "We gotta go sometime, man," she said, and he let her clip the leash on without a fight. But the second she turned the knob, he was pressed against the back of her legs, practically walking on top of her feet. Nothing was out there. Empty hallway, same water stain on the ceiling by the stairs, same smell of somebody's breakfast leaking out from under 3B. She made herself stand in the hall a full minute, just looking, feeling a little ridiculous about it, before Charlie finally relaxed enough to walk normal. It bugged her all through her shift at the clinic. She kept replaying it, the way he'd backed up without looking away, the block of dark under the door that hadn't moved like a person walking by. Between appointments, she looked it up on her phone, feeling dumb even typing it. Dog terrified of hallway, shadow under door not moving. Half the results were about security cameras. The rest were forums full of people convinced their houses were haunted, which didn't help much. She texted her sister that night. "Hey, random question. Has Charlie ever acted freaked out around your place?" Her sister lived 2 states over and hadn't seen the dog in months, so the answer, no. Why? Didn't tell her much. She didn't type out the actual reason. The next few days were quiet. Charlie hesitated at the door each time they came home, but it was shorter, more like a habit than real fear. A beat of stillness, ears up, and then he'd go in fine. No more backing away. No more of that low sound. Melissa started to relax into the idea that maybe it really had been something outside. One bad night, a raccoon or a stray cat spooking him at exactly the wrong moment, and her own exhausted brain doing the rest. She brought it up with Renata anyway, catching her in the little office off the lobby where the building's paperwork lived in stacks that never seemed to shrink. "Probably nothing," Melissa said, feeling stupid the second the words left her mouth. "But has anyone said anything about, like, noises in the hallway? Second floor?" Renata looked up from a stack of invoices, not surprised exactly, more like she was deciding how much to say. "You mean the growling thing?" Melissa's stomach did something. "What growling thing?" "Somebody on 3 called last month. Said they heard something out in the hall late at night. Growling, or something like it. I figured it was somebody's dog got loose, but nobody on that floor's got a dog." Renata shrugged like it wasn't worth much more than that. "Probably raccoons in the walls again. We had that a couple years back on the 4th floor. Nasty. Right, Melissa said. Raccoons. She didn't fully believe it, but she also didn't have anything better to offer, so she let it drop and went back upstairs, telling herself, that was that. Some maintenance issue. An animal problem for the building to deal with. Nothing that had anything to do with her specifically. Charlie greeted her at the door normal that evening, tail going. No hesitation at all. And for a second she almost forgot the whole thing had happened. Then walking him that night, they passed the mouth of the alley 2 buildings down, and Charlie's whole body went rigid. He didn't pull away this time. He stopped dead, nose up, and stared into the dark gap between the buildings for a long 10 seconds before Melissa managed to get him moving again. She looked too, straining to see anything back there. A dumpster, a chain link fence, the usual mess of a Philly alley at night. And saw nothing. No movement, no eyes catching the light. Just Charlie, refusing to look away until they'd put half a block between them and it. She told herself it was probably a cat. There were always cats back there. But that night, back in the apartment, she caught herself checking the peephole before bed, something she'd never once done in 3 years of living there. The hallway looked exactly like it should. Empty, the overhead light doing its usual flicker every few seconds, the strip under her own door unbroken and even. Charlie slept at the foot of her bed like always, but twice that night she woke up to find him sitting up, facing the bedroom door, perfectly still, ears forward, not making a sound. Both times she watched him for a minute, waiting for him to settle, and both times he eventually did, circling twice and dropping back down with a sigh like nothing had happened at all. She didn't sleep great either night. Somewhere underneath the part of her that wanted this to be raccoons and nothing more, there was a smaller, older part. The part that had spent a decade reading fear off animals for a living. That wasn't buying it. Charlie didn't spook at nothing. He never had. And whatever had been sitting outside her door that first night hadn't felt like nothing either, no matter how hard she tried to talk herself into believing it had. By the weekend, life had gone back to normal enough that she almost let the whole thing drop for good. She caught up on laundry, took Charlie to the dog park on Palmer where he ran himself stupid chasing a lab twice his size, texted a friend from work about grabbing drinks the following week. Ordinary stuff. The kind of stretch of days that made the first night feel small and far away. Something she could half convince herself she'd blown out of proportion, because she was tired, because work had been rough, because dogs get spooked by all kinds of nothing. Sunday evening, coming back from the park, Charlie trotted right up to the building door without a pause, tail wagging, completely himself. Melissa laughed a little, relieved in a way that embarrassed her. Relieved over a dog acting like a dog. She scratched behind his ears in the elevator, running again after 3 weeks, and told him he was an idiot and that they were both losing their minds over nothing. She almost believed it the whole way up. It happened on a Tuesday, a little after 11, while Melissa was half asleep with her laptop still open on the bed. A sound came through the wall. Not from the hallway this time, but from somewhere close, low and rhythmic, like something heavy being dragged across a floor. Charlie's head snapped up off the mattress before she'd even fully registered it. Then came the growling. It was loud enough to carry through drywall, a deep, ragged sound that didn't stop, rising and falling like something working itself into a frenzy. Charlie was off the bed in a second, planted in front of the bedroom door, hackles up, barking in a way she'd never heard from him. Not the excited bark he did at the mail carrier, something rawer, more urgent. Melissa's whole body went cold. Every nerve she'd spent the last week telling to calm down lit up at once. She thought about the shadow under the door. She thought about the alley. She thought, with a clarity that scared her more than the noise did, that whatever had been circling her building for the last week had finally decided to come inside. She grabbed the aluminum bat she kept behind the bedroom door, a leftover from her softball days in her 20s, more habit than actual plan, and moved toward the front door with her heart slamming so hard she could feel it in her teeth. Charlie was right there with her, still barking, body low, refusing to let her get between him and the door. The growling kept going. Under it now, she could hear something else. A man's voice, muffled, cursing. and then another thud that shook a picture frame on her wall. She stood at her own door for a long 10 seconds, bat raised, hand on the knob, running through every terrible outcome her brain could offer up. Then she made herself do the one thing that felt insane and necessary at the same time. She looked through the peephole. The hallway light was on, full and even, no gap in it anywhere. And there, 3 doors down, the door to 2C was wide open, light spilling out into the hall. And a very human, very panicked-looking guy in a Sixers t-shirt was wrestling with something on his floor that she couldn't fully see from that angle.
Is everything
Melissa
okay?
opened her door an inch, bat still in hand, feeling ridiculous and terrified in equal measure. "Hey, is everything okay?" The guy, she recognized him vaguely, a new tenant, maybe been in the building 2 months, looked up with wild eyes. Sorry, it's not my brother's dog. He's not good with strangers, and I've got a guy trying to fix my radiator and he flipped out." Behind him, still snarling but clearly winding down, was an enormous, filthy-looking pit mix straining against a leash wrapped twice around a kitchen chair leg, dragging the chair a few inches with every lunge. A maintenance guy stood pressed flat against the far wall, toolbox held up in front of him like a shield. The relief that went through Melissa's body was almost embarrassing in its size. Her knees actually felt weak with it. She stood there in her doorway holding a softball bat at a growling dog 3 units down that had absolutely nothing to do with her, and she started laughing. The kind of laugh that comes out a little too loud, a little too close to something else. "Sorry," the guy said again, hauling the dog back another foot. "He's not usually like this. My brother's out of town, I'm dog sitting, this whole thing is a disaster." "No, it's fine," Melissa said, still catching her breath. "Good luck with the radiator." She shut her door, slid the deadbolt, and sat down right there on the floor of her own apartment with her back against the wall, bat still across her lap. Charlie pressed up against her side, both of them breathing hard. For a while she just sat there, running the whole thing back through her head, feeling the adrenaline drain out slow and leave something almost like shame behind it. A dog-sitting situation gone sideways. A stranger's radiator. That was it. That was the whole terrifying event. Somebody's brother's dog freaking out over a repairman, 3 doors down. Nothing to do with shadows or hallways or anything she'd spent the last week convincing herself she wasn't imagining. She almost felt stupid enough to laugh again. Charlie, though, didn't relax the way she expected him to. He stayed pressed against her, body still tense, ears still half up, watching the front door long after the noise from 2C had died down to nothing. It took him almost 20 minutes to finally settle, circling twice on his bed before dropping down with a sigh that sounded more tired than calm. Melissa told herself that made sense. Loud noise, unfamiliar dog, a scary few minutes. Of course he needed time to come down from that, same as she did. She made tea she barely drank, checked the deadbolt twice more than necessary, and told herself out loud in the empty kitchen that this whole thing had officially been explained. A dog, a radiator, a stressed-out new tenant. Nothing more sinister than bad timing and thin walls. She texted her friend from work a shortened, funnier version of it the next morning. Almost got jumped by a pit bull 3 doors down. Turns out it was just some guy's radiator situation. And got back a string of laughing emojis that made the whole night feel small and manageable in a way it hadn't felt at 2 in the morning. Told out loud like that, it sounded like exactly what it was. A weird, stressful, ultimately harmless Tuesday night in an old building with thin walls and a broken elevator that half worked. She almost enjoyed telling it. There was something satisfying about turning a night of genuine terror into an anecdote, packaging it up small enough to laugh at. She almost believed herself completely, but some part of her, the same part that had clocked Charlie's fear as something different from stubbornness that first night, the same part that read animals for a living and trusted that reading more than she trusted her own nerves, noted and filed away, and didn't quite let go of the fact that Charlie hadn't looked at 2C's door once, the whole time. Not when the growling started, not when she opened her own door. His eyes the entire time had stayed fixed on the empty stretch of hallway past it, toward the stairs, toward nothing at all that she could see. The days after the radiator incident settled into something close to normal, or at least close enough that Melissa stopped bracing herself every time she turned her key in the lock. Charlie's hesitation at the front door shrank down to almost nothing. A half-second pause some nights, gone entirely on others. She started sleeping through the night again. She stopped checking the peephole before bed, or told herself she did, even on the nights she caught herself doing it anyway out of habit and pretended not to notice. Work kept her busy in a way that helped. The clinic had 2 new hires shadowing her that week, both fresh out of vet tech school, both needing everything explained twice, and by the time she got home most evenings she was too worn out to spend much energy on hallway shadows and half-heard growling. There's something almost useful about exhaustion, she thought one night, scrubbing dried blood off her scrub top in the kitchen sink. It doesn't leave much room for anything else. She started actually letting herself enjoy the little things about living where she lived again. The bodega on the corner that knew her order before she said it, the sound of the L running a few blocks over that she'd once found annoying and now barely registered, the particular gold color the light turned in her kitchen, around 6 in the evening. Fishtown in early fall had a kind of ease to it she'd forgotten to appreciate while she'd been busy being scared of her own building. Doyle waved her down on the stairs one evening, still in his usual spot with his mug, though this time it looked like it had something stronger than coffee in it. "Dog seems better," he said, nodding at Charlie, who was sniffing at the base of Doyle's door with mild, ordinary curiosity. Nothing more than that. "Yeah, I think it was just a bad week for him, or me. Probably both." "Good," Doyle said, and there was something in the way he said it, a little too quick, a little too final, that made Melissa pause halfway up the next step. "You never told me what you meant, that night, when you said he was acting weird." Doyle looked at her for a second longer than felt comfortable, like he was doing some private math about how much to say. Then he shrugged, the kind of shrug that closes a door instead of opening one. "Nothing. Old building. Old man. I say weird things sometimes." She let it go, mostly because pushing felt like it would cost more than it was worth, and mostly because some stubborn, tired part of her genuinely didn't want to reopen a conversation she'd only just finished convincing herself she was done having. She said goodnight, and he raised his mug a half-inch in response, and that was that. Upstairs, she made dinner she actually enjoyed instead of just eating on autopilot, watched half a show she'd been meaning to catch up on, let Charlie sprawl across her feet on the couch the way he did on good nights. Everything about the evening felt deliberately, almost defiantly normal, like she was building a case for herself, proof that things were fine, that the last couple weeks had been a fluke, a coincidence, a string of unrelated small events her brain had stitched together into something scarier than any of the individual pieces actually were. She thought about calling her sister, decided against it. There wasn't really anything left to say that wouldn't sound out loud, exactly as thin as it already felt in her own head. A dog spooked one night, a shadow that was probably nothing, a neighbor's dog-sitting disaster that had nothing to do with anything. Individually, none of it held up as a story worth telling. She knew that. She also knew, somewhere underneath the knowing, that she was choosing to believe the version of events that let her sleep at night, and that there was a difference between something being true and something being easy to live with. Charlie, for his part, seemed genuinely fine. He ate normal, played normal, greeted the mail carrier with his usual excessive, undignified enthusiasm. He didn't flinch at the door anymore. He didn't stare at gaps in door frames or freeze at the mouths of alleys. Whatever had gotten into him, whatever had gotten into both of them, really, seemed to have passed the way bad weeks sometimes just do, without explanation, without a tidy reason that ties everything together at the end. She let herself have that, a week of quiet, a week where the building was just a building, old and a little run down and occasionally too loud through the walls, but nothing more than that. A week where she came home, and Charlie shook off at the door and went straight for his water bowl. Exactly the way he had every single day for 3 years before that one Tuesday changed the pattern. By Friday, she'd almost stopped thinking about it entirely. Almost. There was still, some nights, a half-second where she noticed the quality of the light under the door before she could stop herself from noticing it. An old habit that hadn't fully worn off yet, a kind of muscle memory for checking. But the light was always whole, always even. Nothing broke it, night after night, and eventually even that small ritual of noticing started to feel less like vigilance and more like something she'd simply carry with her for a while. The way people carry the reflex to check a stove they already know is off. She didn't know yet that the quiet wasn't an ending. She thought it was one. That was the whole shape of that week, looking back. Not fear and not relief exactly either, but the specific temporary comfort of believing a thing was over because it had, for a handful of days, gone still. Saturday morning, she took Charlie further than usual, down past the park and along the river, just to give them both a change of scenery. He was easy the whole walk, tail up, nose down, doing his usual rounds of every interesting smell within reach. She let herself enjoy it without watching him too closely, without cataloging every twitch of his ears for meaning the way she'd caught herself doing all week. It felt good, that kind of ordinary. She hadn't realized how much energy she'd been spending on vigilance until she had a morning without it. They got back to the building a little after 11, sun still out, the block doing its usual Saturday thing. Somebody washing a car 2 doors down, a kid on a bike doing loops around a fire hydrant, music drifting out from an open window somewhere above. Charlie trotted up the steps without a second's hesitation, pushed his nose against the door like he always used to, and Melissa let herself think, just for a moment, that maybe this really was over. That maybe some things just resolve themselves quietly, without a reason you ever get to know. She should have known better than to think that. She just didn't know it yet. The marks were there Sunday morning, and for a solid minute Melissa just stood in the hallway staring at them, coffee mug still in hand, trying to make her brain produce a boring explanation before it produced anything else. 4 lines, evenly spaced, gouged into the wood of her own front door about waist height. Not scratches exactly. Deeper than that. The kind of grooves that took real pressure to leave behind, splintering up at the edges where whatever made them had dragged down and caught on the grain. They started high, almost shoulder height for her, and ended low near the doorknob like whoever, whatever, made them had been standing upright and then wasn't. She touched one with her fingertip before she could stop herself. It was deep enough that her nail caught in it. Charlie hadn't wanted to come out of the bedroom that morning. She'd chalked it up to a lazy Sunday, hadn't thought much of it while she made coffee, and it was only once she'd stepped out to grab her paper off the mat, an old habit, a real physical paper, one of maybe 6 people left in the neighborhood who still got one, that she'd seen the door and understood all at once why he hadn't wanted to be anywhere near it. She went back inside fast, locked the door, stood there with her back against it for a second like that would help anything. Okay, she told herself. Okay. Think. She made herself think it through the way she'd think through a case at work. Evidence first, panic later. If panic turned out to be warranted at all. Could have been kids. Could have been somebody moving furniture in the hall. A dolly, a bad angle, an accident nobody bothered mentioning. Could have been anything, technically. She almost had herself convinced by the time she'd finished her coffee, sitting at the kitchen table with Charlie pressed against her leg, uncharacteristically clingy, refusing to settle more than a few feet away from her all morning. Except furniture doesn't leave marks that follow a hand's natural drag. Except a dolly doesn't taper the way these did, thick and confident up high, then thinning and dragging lower like whatever made them had lost some of its grip, or its strength, or its balance, on the way down. She'd spent enough years around animals to know what claw marks looked like on wood, on furniture, on the occasional door some anxious dog had torn up trying to get out during a thunderstorm. These weren't that either. They were bigger, spaced wrong for anything she'd ever actually seen do this kind of damage. She texted Renata a photo before she could talk herself out of it. Someone messed up my door last night. 4 gouges, pretty deep. Any idea what's going on? Renata called back within the hour instead of texting. which told Melissa something about how the photo had landed even before she picked up. "That's not the first one," Renata said. No preamble. 4A had something on their doorframe last week. Figured it was somebody's key scratching. People are careless, whatever. This is worse than that one, though. Worse how? A pause. Deeper. And 4A's wasn't shaped like a hand or a paw or anything. Just scratches, random looking. Yours looks like something specific did this on purpose. I don't know. I'm gonna call an exterminator, see if maybe it's some kind of animal thing. Raccoons again. But I gotta be honest. I've never seen a raccoon do this to a solid door. You said 4A. Anyone else? Another pause. Longer this time. Doyle mentioned something a couple weeks back. I didn't take it that seriously at the time. Might be worth asking him yourself. Melissa thanked her, hung up, and sat with the phone in her lap for a while. Charlie's head resting heavy across her feet. His breathing slower now, like just having her sitting still nearby was enough to bring him down from whatever level he'd been running at all morning. She thought about the shadow under the door that first night. She thought about the alley. She thought about how careful she'd been, this whole time, to keep each individual piece small and separate and explainable on its own. A spooked dog, a trick of the light, somebody's dog-sitting disaster. Because each piece alone was manageable, and it was only when you lined them all up next to each other that the shape of something bigger started to show through. 4 gouges in solid wood. A shadow that didn't move like a person. A growl that hadn't come from 2C's dog after all. Not really. Not according to Charlie's eyes that whole night. A neighbor who knew something and wasn't saying it. A building superintendent calling an exterminator for a problem that clearly wasn't raccoons. Not with marks like these. Not with 2 separate doors on 2 separate floors. She got up, went to the door, and looked at the marks again in better light, running her fingers along the deepest one, the one nearest the knob, at exactly the height her own hand rested when she came home at night and reached for her keys. Whatever had made these marks had been reaching for the same spot. That thought sat in her chest for a long time, cold and specific in a way none of the previous week's fear had quite managed to be. Not a maybe anymore. Not a trick of tired eyes or an overactive imagination filling gaps with monsters. Something real had stood at her door, tall enough to reach that high, and had wanted in badly enough to leave a record of trying. She looked down at Charlie, who was watching her now instead of the door, ears soft, tail giving one slow, uncertain wag like he was waiting to see what she'd decide to do about all of this. She didn't have an answer for him yet. She wasn't sure she had one for herself either. Not one that made any sense outside the walls of that apartment. Not one she could say out loud to anyone without sounding like exactly the kind of person she'd have rolled her eyes at a month ago. But she took a photo of the marks anyway, close up, good lighting, the kind of documentation habit 10 years in a clinic had trained into her without her ever meaning to use it for something like this. Evidence first. Panic later, if it turned out to be warranted. She had a feeling, sitting there with her thumb hovering over the photo she'd just taken, that it was going to turn out to be warranted. Renata's office looked different with the door shut, which it almost never was. Melissa knocked twice, waited, and when Renata finally opened up, she had that particular look people get when they've spent the last hour doing something they didn't want to be doing. On the phone, most likely, judging by the legal pad covered in names and numbers on her desk. "Got a minute?" Melissa asked. "For you, sure." Renata waved her in, closed the door again behind her, which felt like its own kind of answer. "You want the honest version, or the version I'm supposed to give tenants?" "Honest, please." Renata sat back down, rubbed her eyes with the heel of her hand, and pulled the legal pad toward her like she needed something to hold on to while she talked. "Okay, so, I called the exterminator guy, the one we used for the raccoon thing a couple years back. He came by, looked at your door, looked at 4A's frame, and told me flat out he wasn't touching either one. Said it wasn't raccoon damage, wasn't rat damage, wasn't anything he had a name for, and he wasn't going to put his name on paperwork for something he couldn't explain. Which, great. Very helpful. So what did you do? Called around. Talked to a couple people I know who manage buildings on the other side of the neighborhood. Turns out I'm not the only one dealing with this. Renata flipped back a page on the pad, scanning it like she needed the notes to keep the details straight. 2 other buildings within like 6 blocks of here have had similar stuff. Door damage nobody can explain. One place had somebody's cat go missing out of a fenced yard. No sign of how it got out. No sign of anything. Gate still latched in the morning. Melissa felt something tighten low in her stomach. A cat. 2 cats, actually, different addresses, and somebody's small dog back around, I want to say August. I didn't put it together with your thing until I started asking around this week. Renata looked up at her. You're not the only one whose dog's been acting weird either. I talked to a lady on Belgrade who said her dog wouldn't go out back for like 10 days straight. Wouldn't explain why, just refused. Did anyone report it? To the city animal control, anybody? A couple people called it in as like a stray dog problem. Maybe a coyote. Which, I mean, we do get coyotes sometimes. They come down along the tracks from the north side, so nobody really blinked at that explanation. Animal control looked into it, didn't find anything. Closed it out as inconclusive. That was maybe 3 weeks ago. Renata leaned back in her chair, arms crossed. I'm not saying I believe in anything weird, Melissa. I want to be really clear about that. I think there's probably some boring explanation buried in here somewhere, and none of us are looking at it right, because we're all a little freaked out and looking for a story instead of an answer. But I've had 4 different people describe basically the same thing to me in the last 2 weeks, and none of them know each other, and I don't love that. Melissa sat with that for a second, turning it over. Missing pets. Door damage nobody could name. Dogs that wouldn't leave the house, wouldn't go in the yard, wouldn't approach certain doors, and nobody connecting any of it because each individual person only had their own small piece, the way she'd only had her own small piece up until about a week ago. What about Doyle? She asked. You said he mentioned something. Renata's expression shifted, something careful coming into it. Doyle's lived in this neighborhood his whole life. His family's been here since before half these buildings went up. He's got, I don't know how to put this politely, he's got theories about a lot of things. Some of them are probably right, some of them are definitely not. I'd take whatever he tells you with a grain of salt, but I also wouldn't dismiss it outright, because the man knows this block better than anybody else alive. That's not really an answer. I know. I don't have a better one to give you. Renata tapped her pen against the legal pad, thinking. Look, off the record, building management liability-wise, I don't love telling you to go have some late-night porch conversation with a 70-something-year-old man about monsters. On the record, human being to human being, if I were you, I'd go talk to him. He clearly wants to say something. He's just waiting for somebody to actually ask instead of brushing him off, the way I probably did the first time he brought it up to me. Melissa nodded slowly, filing that away next to everything else. The marks on her door, the cats, the dog on Belgrade Street that wouldn't go in the yard, the exterminator who wouldn't put his name on paperwork. None of it fit together into anything clean or simple yet, but it was starting to have a shape, the outline of something bigger than one spooked dog on one bad Tuesday night. You gonna tell tenants anything? Officially, I mean. Renata sighed, long and tired. I'm supposed to say there's a pest issue we're monitoring and everyone should keep their doors and windows secure at night, which is technically true and technically useless. I don't have anything better than that to put on a flyer. What am I gonna write? Unexplained large animal, possibly aggressive, source unknown. I'd have 3 units move out by Friday and the other 12 would think I lost my mind. Fair. Just keep your door locked, keep the dog close. And if you talk to Doyle, let me know what he says. I'm curious too, even if I'm not saying that to anybody else in this building. Melissa thanked her and let herself out, standing for a second in the lobby afterward, looking down the hallway toward the stairs, toward the 2nd floor, toward Doyle's usual spot in his open doorway with his mug. She wasn't ready yet, not that same afternoon, to go knock on his door and ask him to say out loud whatever he'd been holding back for weeks. But she knew now that she was going to. It was just a question of when, and how much of an answer she actually wanted once she got it. Back upstairs, she sat at her kitchen table with her laptop open and typed Fishtown missing pets coyote into the search bar, then deleted it, then typed something closer to what she actually meant and deleted that too. There wasn't a search that would tell her anything Renata hadn't already told her. Whatever this was, it lived in the space between official reports and things people only said out loud to each other over coffee on their own front steps. The kind of local knowledge that never made it onto a city website or a police blotter, because nobody wanted to be the first person to say the word that would make them sound crazy. Charlie lay by her feet, calm for now, and she reached down and rested a hand on his back without really thinking about it, feeling the steady rise and fall of his breathing. Whatever this was, he'd known about it before any of them. Before Doyle's careful silences, before Renata's legal pad full of half-connected reports, before the marks on the door. She meant to go talk to Doyle the next evening, but a double shift at the clinic ran long. A Great Dane came in with bloat, the kind of emergency that eats up hours and doesn't let you check your phone even once. And by the time she got home, it was past 10 and the building was already quiet in that specific late-night way. Most windows dark. The hallway lights doing their usual half-hearted flicker every few seconds, like they'd been doing it for so long nobody bothered fixing them anymore. He'd known that first night, standing at the entrance and refusing to move, and she'd spent 2 weeks trying to talk both of them out, of trusting what he already understood. She wasn't going to make that mistake again. Charlie was wired the second she opened the apartment door to leave for her walk, which normally would have been reassuring. His usual easy self, tail up, ready to go. Except it was almost 11 and she'd meant to just take him around the block fast and get to bed. He pulled toward the stairs instead of the elevator, which wasn't unusual. He liked the stairs, but he took them 2 at a time in a way that had her half jogging to keep up, and by the second floor landing she noticed Doyle's door was shut. Not just shut, dark. No light coming from underneath it, no sound of a TV, nothing. She'd never once seen his apartment dark that early. She almost stopped to knock. Would have, if Charlie hadn't gone rigid on the landing exactly the way he had that very first night. Front paws locked, weight thrown backward, a low sound starting in his chest that she felt more than heard. The hallway light above them buzzed and went out. Not flickered, went out fully and stayed that way, leaving the landing lit only by the thin gray spill from the stairwell window and whatever made it up from the fixture 1 floor below. Melissa's whole body went still in a way she didn't consciously choose. She could hear her own pulse. She could hear Charlie's low, continuous growl, and underneath it, closer than it should have been for a hallway she could have sworn was empty a second ago. Breathing. Not her breathing, not Charlie's. Something heavier, wetter, with an uneven catch in it, like each breath dragged over something that didn't sit quite right on the way in. She turned, slow toward the stairwell going up because that's where the sound was coming from, and in the gray half-light from the window she saw it. Not all of it. Never all of it. The stairwell bent at an angle just above the landing, and whatever was up there stayed mostly behind that turn. One shoulder and part of a flank visible where the light from the window caught it. The shoulder was wrong, lower than it should have sat, dropped at an angle that made the whole silhouette look uneven, like something old and healed badly had left it permanently canted to one side. Fur covered that shoulder thick, dark, matted in places, but lower down, where the flank came into view past the corner, the fur thinned out to almost nothing. Skin showing through pale and stretched in the dim light. It wasn't moving. That was somehow worse than if it had been. It stood there, half around the corner, utterly still except for that ragged, uneven breathing. And Melissa realized, distantly, underneath the roaring panic starting to build in her chest, that it was watching her the same unblinking way Charlie had watched the door that first night. Waiting, deciding something. The smell hit her a second later, carried down the stairwell on whatever air was moving, and she knew it immediately, in her body before her mind caught up. The exact smell of an abscess she'd lanced 100 times at the clinic, sweetish and rotten underneath. Something dying slowly inside a body that hadn't stopped moving yet. Under it, something wetter, like fur that had been soaked and never properly dried. Charlie lunged forward half a step, barking now, sharp and continuous, putting his whole small body between Melissa and the stairs, and that was what broke whatever stillness had been holding the thing in place. It moved, not toward them, away, up in one motion too fast and too wrong for the size of it. A kind of explosive lurch that covered the width of the landing above in less than a second. The low shoulder rising and falling unevenly with each stride. Claws. She heard them more than saw them, scraping hard against the concrete steps as it took the next flight 2-3 steps at a time. She caught one more piece of it in that half-second of motion. A hand, or something built roughly like one, wide and dark-nailed, slapping flat against the wall to catch itself around the turn. Gone again, before she could process anything more than its size. Then nothing. Just the stairwell, empty, the hallway light above them flickering back on like nothing had happened, and Charlie still barking at the empty space where it had been, his whole body shaking with it. Melissa didn't remember deciding to run. She just found herself back at her own door, key hand shaking too hard to get it in the lock on the first try. Charlie pressed against her legs the whole time, still growling low even after the door was shut and bolted, and she'd slid down against it onto the floor, breathing like she'd just come off a full sprint. She sat there a long time, long enough for her hands to stop shaking, long enough to notice distantly that her phone had 3 missed texts from Renata, asking if everything was okay, that a downstairs neighbor had apparently heard something and called the office. Long enough to realize with a strange, cold clarity that she wasn't imagining any of this, hadn't been imagining any of it. Not the shadow, not the marks, not any of it. And that whatever that thing was, it had been close enough tonight to reach out and touch, and had chosen for whatever reason not to. She didn't know why. She didn't know what had made it stop, what had made it run instead of finishing whatever it had started that first night at her door. She only knew that it had seen her clearly, and that now, for the first time since this had started, she'd seen it too. Somewhere below her, faint through the floor, she heard the building settle into its normal night sounds again. A door somewhere, a pipe knocking, the ordinary creak of an old structure cooling down after the day. It sounded almost obscene. How normal it all was, like nothing had happened at all. Like she hadn't just stood 8 feet from something that shouldn't exist and watched it decide, in real time, whether or not to close the distance. She thought about Doyle's dark apartment. She thought about the shoulder, low and wrong, and the way the fur gave out to bare skin below it, and wondered, with a nausea that had nothing to do with the smell still caught somewhere in the back of her throat, whether he'd seen it too. Whether that was exactly why his lights were off and his door was shut tonight of all nights. Whether he'd learned, the hard way, on some earlier night she didn't know about yet, that being dark and quiet and still was the only thing that had ever worked. She didn't sleep. Around 2 she gave up, pretending she might, made tea she didn't drink, and sat at the kitchen table with Charlie curled against her feet, both of them worn down past fear into something quieter and more exhausted. Every time the building made a normal sound, a pipe, a floor above her creaking, the wind pushing against the window, her whole body flinched before her brain caught up and told her it was nothing. By 7, gray light coming up over the rooftops across the street, she'd made a decision she didn't love but couldn't talk herself out of. She was going to Doyle's door, whether he wanted to open it or not, and she wasn't leaving until he told her something real. He answered on the second knock, which surprised her. She'd half expected to have to stand out there for 20 minutes. He looked like he hadn't slept either, deep shadows under his eyes, still in the same clothes she'd seen him in the day before. He looked at her for a long second, then passed her down the hallway, then stepped back and held the door open without a word, which felt like more of an answer than anything he could have said. His apartment was dim, even with the morning light coming through the blinds, cluttered in the specific way of someone who'd lived in one place a very long time. Stacks of newspapers, photographs in frames gone slightly crooked, a police scanner on the counter that crackled low and constant in the background. He didn't offer her coffee. He sat down heavy in a worn armchair and gestured at the couch across from it. "You saw it," he said. Not a question. "Last night, on the stairs." Her voice came out steadier than she expected. I need you to tell me what you know, Mr. Doyle. Please. He was quiet long enough that she thought he might not answer at all. Then he rubbed a hand over his face and started talking, slow, like each piece of it cost him something. My father saw it too. Back in the 70s, this whole neighborhood was different, rougher. Half these buildings weren't here yet. He never talked about it much, not to strangers. But he told me enough that I knew what I was looking at the first time I saw it myself, maybe 15 years ago now. It comes and goes. Years where nothing happens, then a stretch like this. Nobody official's ever going to tell you that because nobody official believes it. And the ones who've seen it learn fast not to say much, because saying much doesn't do anything except get you looked at funny. What is it? Actually, not folklore. What have you seen it do? It takes animals mostly, small ones. Sometimes it goes after people, but not often, and near as I can tell, not without some kind of reason. Territory, maybe, or being cornered, or somebody getting too close too many times in a row. You've been getting close whether you meant to or not. Your dog reacting the way he did right off that first night? That's not nothing. Animals know before we do. Always have. Why didn't you say anything? Weeks ago, when I asked you straight out? Doyle looked at her, something tired and almost apologetic in his face. Because the last time I told somebody straight out what I thought was going on, they had me talked about for 2 years like I'd lost my mind. And because talking about it doesn't seem to make a difference either way. It comes when it comes, does what it does, and eventually it moves on or goes quiet again for a while. I didn't think saying the word out loud to you would change any of that. I'm not sure I was right about that looking back. Maybe if I'd said something sooner, you'd have kept more distance. Distance doesn't seem to matter much. It knows where I live. Something in Doyle's expression tightened at that. Yeah, I was afraid of that with the marks on your door. That's different from the other stuff. That's not just passing through anymore. They sat with that for a moment, the scanner crackling low between them, neither of them saying the thing that was obviously sitting in the room now. That whatever this was, it had noticed her specifically, had come back to her door more than once, had stood close enough last night to be touched. What do people do? She finally asked. The ones who've dealt with this before. What actually works? Depends who you ask. Some people leave for a while, wait it out somewhere else till it moves on. Some people just get careful. Locks, lights, keeping animals close, not being out alone late if you can help it. I don't know that anybody's ever really made it stop. It's not the kind of thing that stops because you want it to. He looked at her, steady now, some of the exhaustion falling away into something closer to concern. I'd think hard about staying here right now, if I'm honest. Not forever. Just till this particular stretch runs its course. A few weeks, maybe a month or two, based on what I remember from before. Melissa sat with that, running it against everything else. The lease she'd signed a year ago, the job 15 minutes away, the life she'd built in this specific 4-block radius of the city that had nothing to do with any of this until 3 weeks ago. Leaving wasn't simple. It never was. But sitting in Doyle's dim living room at 7 in the morning, still able to feel exactly where that thing's breath had carried down a dark stairwell toward her. Simple wasn't really the standard she was measuring against anymore. She thanked him, told him she'd think about what he said, and meant it, walking back to her own apartment, Charlie close against her leg the whole way. She found herself doing the math on her lease, her savings, whether her sister's spare room in Jersey was still an option, whether any of this would sound like anything other than crazy if she tried explaining it to anyone who hadn't stood on those stairs with her. She didn't have an answer yet, but for the first time since that first night, she had something like a plan starting to take shape, even if it was only the shape of leaving. She'd meant to leave that Saturday, bags mostly packed, a short-term sublet lined up 2 neighborhoods over through a co-worker's cousin, the whole plan put together in 3 fast days of barely sleeping and trying not to think too hard about what she was running from. By Friday night, the apartment was half boxed up, the kitchen stripped down to whatever she still needed for one more morning, and the trash bag by the door had started to leak through the bottom. It wasn't just a smell anymore. There was a dark spot spreading on the floorboards beneath it, and Charlie had already nosed at it twice before she snapped at him harder than she meant to. Leaving it there overnight meant waking up to a worse mess on moving day. Maybe one she couldn't clean before handing the keys back. So she told herself it was 30 seconds. Back door, bins, back inside. No walk, no alley, no street. Just the fenced lot behind the building. Friday night, taking that trash out because the chute was jammed again, was the night it finally came for Charlie instead of her. She almost didn't go out at all. It was nearly 10, later than she liked being outside these days, and every part of her knew better than to open that back door. But the bag was already in her hand. The leak had already smeared across the floor, and the bins were maybe 20 feet from the entrance. Charlie came with her because he wouldn't let her reach the door alone anymore, pressing close against her leg, before she even had the leash clipped, trotting along at her side while she pushed through the back door into the narrow fenced-in lot where the building kept its bins. The motion light over the door didn't come on. She noticed that a half-second too late, already 3 steps out into the dark, bag in one hand, Charlie's leash looped loose around her wrist instead of held tight the way she should have known better to hold it by now. The growl came from the far corner of the lot, low and this time close enough that there was no mistaking it for anything happening 3 doors down. Charlie didn't hesitate. He pulled the leash straight out of her loose grip and lunged toward the sound, barking hard, putting himself between her and whatever was crouched in the dark by the fence. And that was when she saw it clearly for the first time. Close enough and still enough for one terrible stretched-out second, that later she'd be able to describe pieces of it in a way she never could after the stairwell. It was low to the ground, coiled the way something gets right before it moves. One shoulder dropped noticeably lower than the other, throwing its whole stance off balance in a way that should have made it look weaker, and somehow didn't. The jaw worked slightly wrong when it snarled back at Charlie, one side dropping further than the other, teeth showing long and yellowed and very obviously built for tearing, not talking, not anything close to human despite whatever else about the shape of the face made her stomach turn. Thick fur along its back caught what little light there was. Lower down, near a foreleg planted awkwardly under that low shoulder, the fur gave way to skin scraped raw and pink in patches, like something that had been dragging that leg for longer than was good for it. It moved toward Charlie, not toward her, and every instinct Melissa had went straight past fear into something colder and faster. She grabbed the metal trash can lid off the bin beside her and swung it hard, screaming something wordless, more noise than words, and caught the thing across what she thought was its shoulder. The low one, already wrong, already weak. Hard enough that the impact rang up her own arm, and it staggered sideways with a sound that was half snarl, half something closer to pain. Charlie kept barking, darting in and back, exactly the way she'd seen scared, brave dogs do 100 times at the clinic when something bigger cornered them, and running wasn't an option, keeping himself between the threat and the person he'd decided was his to protect, no matter how badly outmatched he was. Charlie, come. Charlie, now. He didn't listen, not right away, too locked into the standoff to hear her, and for 3 or 4 seconds that felt endless. She genuinely believed she was about to watch her dog die 8 feet in front of her in a fenced concrete lot behind her own apartment building. Then the back door banged open behind her. Doyle, in a bathrobe of all things, a flashlight in one hand and something long and metal in the other, some old length of pipe he must have kept by his door for exactly this, and he hit the switch for the busted motion light with the flat of his palm hard enough that it flickered, sputtered, and finally caught, flooding the whole lot with sudden white light. The thing recoiled from it instantly, throwing an arm up. A hand, wide, dark-nailed, unmistakably a hand even in that fraction of a second, across whatever passed for its eyes, and in the same motion exploded backward toward the fence, that same impossible burst of speed she'd seen on the stairs. Low shoulder rising and falling hard with each stride, and was over the top of the chain link and gone into the dark of the next lot, before Doyle had even finished crossing the threshold of the door. Silence rushed back in so fast it felt like its own kind of violence. Melissa's ears were ringing. Charlie was still barking at the fence, hoarse now, exhausted, but alive, completely unhurt as far as she could tell in the shaking few seconds it took her to drop to her knees and run her hands over him, checking anyway. "You all right?" Doyle asked, breathing hard, pipe still raised like he half expected it to come back. I don't know." Her hands wouldn't stop shaking. Charlie pressed his whole body against her, panting, and she held onto him too tight, the way you hold something you almost lost. Doyle helped her up, walked them both back inside, locked the door behind them, and stood with his back against it for a second like he needed the wall as much as she did. "Light," he said, mostly to himself. "It doesn't like the light. I should have remembered that sooner. My father used to say that, and I let myself forget it because it had been quiet so long." Melissa sat down hard on the bottom stair, Charlie in her lap despite his size, both of them still trembling, and understood, with a clarity that cut straight through the fear, that the plan she'd made 3 days ago, pack slow, leave Saturday, take her time about it, wasn't a plan anymore. It hadn't gone after her tonight. It had gone after him. She wasn't waiting until Saturday. She wasn't spending one more night in that building at all if she could help it. The new place was smaller, a third-floor walk-up in a part of South Philly she barely knew, chosen mostly because it was available in 9 days, and the landlord didn't ask many questions about a broken lease 2 neighborhoods over. Melissa told the leasing office some half-true story about a bad situation with a downstairs neighbor. Nobody pressed for details. Nobody ever does, if you say it with the right amount of tired in your voice, she thought, packing up the old apartment in a single frantic weekend with a rented van and 2 co-workers she'd bribed with pizza. That leaving would feel like an ending. It didn't. Not really. It felt more like closing a door on a room she hadn't finished cleaning. The marks in the old front door still there, unexplained, painted over by Renata before the next tenant moved in, filed away in some part of her that would probably keep those grooves in memory longer than the building itself would stand. Doyle helped her carry boxes down the stairs that last morning, slower than he used to be. Or maybe she was only noticing it now. At the bottom, setting down the last box by the van, he'd held her hand a second longer than a normal goodbye required and told her, plain, that leaving was the right call, that she shouldn't feel bad about it, that some places just aren't good to stay in once something's noticed you specifically. She'd asked him if he was going to be okay. He'd shrugged the same shrug he'd given her weeks earlier, the one that closed doors instead of opening them, and said he'd lived through worse stretches than this one, which wasn't really an answer, and which she'd chosen not to push on, because some people carry things a certain way and asking them to carry it differently doesn't help anyone. She thought about him more than she expected to, those first few weeks in the new place, wondered whether the quiet was starting again for him, or whether it was only starting for her. The new building didn't have a broken elevator, or a superintendent with a legal pad of half-connected reports, or thin walls that let every argument and TV show bleed through. It had good light, reliable hot water, and a landlord who fixed things within a week of being asked, which felt, after everything, almost suspiciously easy. Charlie took to it fast, faster than she expected, honestly, given everything he'd carried through those last weeks on Susquehanna Street. Within a few days, he had his usual routines rebuilt. The spot by the radiator, the specific 3 seconds of circling before he'd settle on his bed, the immediate and enthusiastic greeting for the mail carrier, who here was a woman named Denise, who kept dog treats in her bag, specifically for him. Melissa didn't stop checking the light under the door at night. She knew, somewhere honest in herself, that she probably never would again. Not completely. That some habits don't fully wear off just because the thing that started them is 1.5 miles away, and as far as she knew, staying put. But the checking changed shape over those first months. It stopped being dread and started being something closer to what Doyle had probably lived with his whole life, without ever naming it that way. A kind of ordinary vigilance, folded into the rest of an ordinary day, no more remarkable than locking a car or checking a stove. She never told her sister the real version. She told her a shortened one eventually, months later, over a phone call that started as small talk about the new apartment. Something about a rough patch with a neighbor, some vague, unsatisfying phrase that let the subject close itself without either of them having to sit inside it too long. Her sister didn't push. Some things you can tell people, and some things you just let become the kind of story that only makes sense to the person who lived it. The details filed down over time into something small enough to carry without it cutting you. What she didn't expect, moving in, was how the fear itself would end up changing shape rather than simply fading. She'd braced for nightmares, for months of jumping at shadows, for some slow unwinding of trauma she'd have to work through alone at 2 a.m. with the lights on. Instead, what she got, mostly, was something quieter and stranger. A kind of clarity she hadn't had before any of it started. She trusted Charlie now in a way she hadn't fully let herself before. Not just liked him, not just loved him, but trusted him, completely. The way you trust an instrument you've learned to read correctly. When he tensed at something on a walk, she didn't argue with him anymore. She just moved. 6 months in, on an ordinary Tuesday evening, walking him past the mouth of an alley 3 blocks from the new place, Charlie stopped. Not the old kind of stop. No rigid panic, no trembling. None of the raw terror from that very first night on Susquehanna Street. Just a pause, ears up, nose working, reading something in the dark she couldn't perceive at all. She stood with him, unhurried, and waited, watching him work it out the way she'd watch a colleague examine something at the clinic. Patient, present, giving the process the respect it deserved instead of rushing past it. After a few seconds, he huffed once, shook himself, and kept walking. Whatever it had been already filed away and forgotten, at least by him. Melissa didn't look back over her shoulder the way she might have once. She just kept walking too, matching his pace, her hand loose and easy on the leash instead of white-knuckled around it, and let herself notice, without needing it to mean anything more than this, that she wasn't running from the dark anymore. She thought later that night, making tea in her new kitchen with Charlie sprawled across her feet the way he always did on good evenings, about a question she still didn't have a real answer to. Whether it had been chance that put her on that stretch of Susquehanna Street to begin with, or whether some places just accumulate that kind of attention over enough years, the way old buildings accumulate water damage and bad wiring, quietly, underneath everything else, until someone new moves in and starts the process over again for whoever comes next. She was just walking through it, same as always, paying attention, trusting the one set of instincts in her life that had never once been wrong. She hoped, without much conviction, that whoever ended up in her old apartment had a dog too. Not because she wished the fear on anyone, just because she knew now, in a way she hadn't 3 months ago, exactly how much a dog's attention was worth, and how much easier the whole thing might have gone if she'd trusted his the first night instead of the 5th week. She left the porch light on that night, the way she'd started doing without really deciding to, not out of fear exactly, but out of something closer to habit built from respect. A small, steady signal to anything that might be paying attention that this particular door, this particular home, wasn't going to be an easy or a quiet one to test. Nothing came. Nothing ever did in that new place. Not once in all the months that followed. But the light stayed on anyway, every night, long after she'd stopped consciously flipping the switch and started simply leaving it that way. The same as any other habit a body keeps long after the reason for it has faded into something closer to memory than fear. Charlie slept easy that night, the way he always did now, stretched out at the foot of her bed with one paw twitching through some dream she'd never know the shape of. Melissa lay awake a little longer than usual, not out of dread, just out of the quiet, ordinary wakefulness of someone who'd learned, the hard way, exactly how much attention the world deserved, and found, somewhere in that stillness, something she hadn't expected to find at the end of any of this. Not relief exactly. Something steadier than that. Something that felt, for the first time in a long while, like trust.